So with regards to your work, UltraMAP's work with oil and gas as a category, I think you mentioned to me that it was only in recent years that you started to work, relatively recent years in your 13-ish that you've been around. Tell me about your work with oil and gas companies, please.
Yeah, well, we got commissioned to protect a subsea gas pipeline. So we started with that. That was our first venture into oil and gas, and we still protect that pipeline that goes across from the UK to the Netherlands. So we stopped that being hit by vessels dropping their anchor on it, fishing over the top of it in our usual way. But we also then became more involved in protecting what are called umbilicals, power and communication cables between oil and gas platforms around the world and the power and comms that come from shore out to the oil and gas platform. So although it's the oil and gas industry, it's still what we're really good at. It's still monitoring the subsea cables. And in fact, we're doing that in many places around the world. And it's taken a little bit of a different turn in that a number of, because there's so many of these cables in between the structures, it's introduced us to a different way of monitoring and alerting in a slightly different way, in a more detailed way.
And you're talking about structures a number of times there.
Yeah. I'm talking about surface-based structures or rigs and platforms.
So does UltraMAP protect, for example, creating and monitoring exclusion zones around these structures that jut above the surface of the sea? Is that part of your work?
Yeah, certainly. Asset Monitor is used in many places around the world to monitor exclusion zones. And you're right, around every oil and gas rig and platform, there are exclusion zones in there. There are inherent exclusion zones. But we aren't just involved in that. So in other areas around the world, around port areas, around anchorages, we're involved in alerting whenever a vessel goes anywhere near these exclusion zones. We're not involved in any environmental areas yet. We'd like to be, I think, monitoring exclusion zones around protected marine areas, for example, because that's certainly what Asset Monitor is very good at.
This reminds me of conversations we've had about the difference between assurance and insurance, because it's assurance that you're in, isn't it? You just don't, the prevention of cable strikes. Thankless task, it would seem to me sometimes, because you're stopping things happening. But clearly that's your role, above the surface and beneath the surface.
That's definitely what we do. So our customers work with us to stop these occasionally disastrous events happening. Okay.
And it would strike me in oil and gas that the implications of cable strikes are not only financially disastrous, but also potentially environmentally disastrous as well.
That's right, yeah. So in another chat we've had, I talked about an example of hitting a power cable and oil leaking out. It's the same issue. Anything which comes out of an oil and gas related subsea structure can have potentially devastating environmental consequences.
It's interesting. It seems to me that, I suppose I'm going back to the subject of the thankless task comment, because of course, and quite rightly, of course, the world will talk about when things go wrong, but your job is to make sure that, and work really hard 24/7 to make sure that these things don't happen.
Okay. Yeah.
I was going to ask you, okay, so there's a change, because I think you mentioned, or certainly you reminded me of this word, evolution. There's an evolution in this category, the oil and gas category, it seems to me, where the nature of your work might change. Because, correct me if I'm wrong, some structures and pipelines are decommissioned. Are you involved when they have a change of use, or there's some secondary work? I'm making the term up.
I think we aren't involved per se in the decommissioning process. But we certainly do see an evolution happening in the oil and gas area. It's more evident at the moment when everyone's cars are just sitting on their driveway, not going anywhere. So there's certainly less use of petrol, diesel. We know our UK government are banning the production of diesel cars pretty soon. So everything is going down the electric route, and there's going to be less reliance upon certainly oil in the future. So all of the customers that we have in the oil and gas area certainly aren't spending as much money, and we see an evolution, a movement from them and their suppliers over to, for example, the renewable energy market. So we see some of the names we generally would associate with oil and gas becoming involved in renewable energy.
I was interested in the decommissioning, the potential decommissioning of the current oil and gas infrastructure and the recommissioning of it into something else. And thank you for.
I think there's certainly potential there for that, isn't it? So there's lots and lots of these structures out there.
Yeah.
Not all becoming redundant, but certainly less used, potentially with some hope of their use in the future. So it's only natural that you think they would be used for something else. I don't know what that something else is, but it seems to be a natural move, doesn't it?
Yeah, I guess so. But over the years, in the times where you've been helping me to understand what UltraMAP does, your own evolution is quite stark. When I'm looking from the outside in, you perhaps don't see it so much from the inside out, but working across 5 categories and the partnerships that you've struck up on a global platform, which we're going to talk about in another video as well.
Yes.
So,
yes.
Okay, renewables. Sorry, oil and gas. So anything else we should be talking about? I think we've covered it there, haven't we?
I think so. Right,
thank you.
That's quite all right.